In a quiet neighborhood of Daegu, the Lee and Kim families were neighbors, but the gap between them was more than just physical distance. The Kim family, with their 3 sons, was a picture of success. Mr. Kim, a kind-hearted man, was known for his wisdom and fairness. His eldest son, Taehyung, had dreams of building a life for himself in New York, a vision that went against the traditions of the small, conservative town. His 2 younger brothers were still in school, but Taehyung had already made a name for himself, both locally and internationally. Across the street, the Lee family had a very different dynamic. Mr. Lee, a traditional and authoritarian man, controlled the household with an iron fist. He had 2 sons, who were his pride and joy, and 1 daughter, Lee Hwa-in, but Hwa-in, being the only girl in the family, was seen as a burden. In a society like theirs, where daughters were often considered less valuable, Mr. Lee never hesitated to remind her of her place. Hwa-in, now 20 years old, had been forced to drop out of school after high school, her future uncertain and limited by the rigid expectations of her father. She was scared of her father, unable to make any decisions without his approval. Whenever he came home, she'd run to her room, staying out of sight until he settled into his chair. But one day, everything changed. Mr. Kim had noticed how often Taehyung's gaze lingered on Hwa-in, and how there seemed to be a quiet longing in his eyes whenever she was around. Unlike her father, Mr. Kim didn't see Hwa-in as a burden. He saw the beauty in her, not just her looks, but the strength she carried despite the difficult situation at home. He decided that it was time to speak up, to take a different approach than the one Mr. Lee had set for his daughter. He approached Mr. Lee one evening, after their usual greetings. "Mr. Lee," he began with a calm voice, "I've been watching Taehyung, and I can see the way he looks at your daughter. I would like to ask for her hand in marriage for him." Mr. Lee, surprised by the proposal but also pleased by the thought of having such a prestigious family involved with his, quickly agreed. "Of course," he said without hesitation, eager for the connection. "It's about time my daughter marries someone of importance. Taehyung is a good man." Hwa-in was unaware of the conversation, and when she did find out, she was shocked. She had never considered her future, always feeling trapped in the rigid life her father had set for her. But Taehyung had always been kind to her, unlike the other men in her life. There was something in his gaze, in his quiet support, that made her feel as though maybe, just maybe, she had a chance at a different life. Despite Mr. Lee's approval, there was still one issue: Taehyung's dream to go to New York and start his business. What if he leaves and doesn't marry her? Mr. Lee had worried, what will happen to my daughter then? Taehyung, confident in his feelings for Hwa-in, responded with determination. "I have nothing to lose, Mr. Lee. I will take her with me. I don't need anything else." The discussion continued until they reached a resolution. Hwa-in would stay with her parents until Taehyung had arranged everything in New York. Once he was ready, he would send for her. Mr. Lee, as usual, agreed, but his approval came with a stipulation: Hwa-in would remain under his roof, where he could continue to protect her. Taehyung didn't care about the conditions. He just wanted to be with Hwa-in. Hwa-in, ever the obedient daughter, had no say in the matter. She complied with her father's wishes, even though deep inside, she longed for the life she never got to have. The decision was made, and the marriage ceremony would take place in private, away from the eyes of the judgmental world around them. The day of the ceremony arrived, and everything felt like a dream Hwa-in wasn't sure she was ready to live. The small, intimate ceremony took place at a local temple, far away from prying eyes. Hwa-in's heart raced with every step she took, each movement filled with uncertainty and fear. She glanced around at the quiet, almost somber ceremony. The only people present were her immediate family, the Kim family, and a few close friends. Taehyung stood at the altar, looking more confident than she had ever seen him. As the vows were exchanged, Hwa-in could barely focus on the words. She was too caught up in the whirlwind of emotions, the dread of what was coming. Would this life truly be better than the one she had? She had never been able to make decisions for herself, and now she had no choice but to accept her new life with Taehyung, a man she barely knew beyond their brief encounters. The ceremony ended quickly, and before she knew it, she was married. Won couldn't even remember walking back down the aisle, only the weight of Taehyung's hand on hers and the odd, foreign sensation of being someone's wife. Leaving with her parents, after the wedding, Taehyung's departure for New York was looming in just a few days. It wasn't a dream Won had imagined, not even close. She hadn't expected her life to change overnight, but it had. With nothing but an aching heart and the bond of a title, she went back home with her parents, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. Taehyung left to prepare for his new journey, and Won was left in her room, unsure of what to do with herself. The house was quiet, and yet, from the corner of her eye, she saw Taehyung. He was standing outside, near the window of his house, just across from hers. Their eyes met for a brief second. He gave her a small smile, the kind that made Won's heart skip a beat. But before she could react, she quickly pulled the curtains and hid. She couldn't help but feel self-conscious, unsure of how to face him. It was one thing to be his wife, but to be around him was a different story. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was her husband, and she wasn't sure how to handle it. 2 days later, Won's younger brother had a birthday celebration at home. The house was filled with noise, laughter, and excitement. The guests had started drinking heavily, and the atmosphere quickly shifted. Won tried to stay out of the way, lost in her thoughts, but the festivities around her were unavoidable. Everyone was enjoying the party, including Taehyung, who, after a few drinks, seemed to let his guard down. Won could see him from across the room, his cheeks flushed with alcohol. He looked more relaxed, more carefree than she had ever seen him before. He caught her eye for a moment, his gaze lingering on her. Won froze, unsure of how to respond, but when Taehyung made his way over to her, a playful grin on his face, she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. "I can't believe I got such a beautiful, innocent wife," Taehyung said, his words slurring slightly. He smiled at her, his eyes softening in a way that made Won blush. "Stop," Won whispered, her face heating up. "No, really," Taehyung continued, leaning in closer, making her heart race. "You're everything I could have asked for." In her heart, Won knew she liked him. She had always felt a connection to him, even when she was unsure of her feelings. And at that moment, her hesitations seemed to fade away. She nodded slightly, letting him continue speaking. She was still unsure of the future, of everything, but maybe this was the start of something new. Taehyung slowly stirred in bed, his arm draped over Won, the warmth of her still beside him. The events of the previous night were still vivid in his mind. It was a night that meant something special, even though everything had happened quickly. Won was his wife now, and that simple fact made his heart swell with pride. It wasn't just the marriage that had changed, but the way he saw her, how deeply he now cared for her. The room was quiet, save for the soft breathing of Won, who was still fast asleep, her face peaceful and serene. Taehyung gently shifted, careful not to wake her. His thoughts were a mix of excitement for the future and calmness, knowing he'd finally made the commitment he wanted. There was no rush, no pressure. She was his wife. That was all that mattered. He picked up his phone, checking the time. His flight to New York was soon. He had to leave, but part of him didn't want to go. Taehyung leaned down and placed a soft kiss on Won's forehead, whispering gently, "I'll be back soon, Won. I'll make sure of it." As he quietly stepped out of the room, the weight of the situation hit him. He was leaving her for a few days, but he had no doubt she would be with him again soon. For now, he had to go, but the promise he made to her remained in his heart. Won sat by the window, her eyes focused on the distant skyline of Daegu. The soft hum of the quiet house seemed to echo in her ears as she waited for Taehyung to send for her. The days felt long, and each passing minute made her heart ache a little more. She knew he was out there working hard for their future, but she felt so alone without him. Her father refused to allow her to have contact with him, and she had no phone, no way to reach him. It frustrated Wyan to no end. She wanted to talk to him, to hear his voice, but her father wouldn't allow it. When she tried to call him through the landline, her father quickly snatched up the receiver and hung up the phone, his harsh words only making her retreat further into herself. All Wyan could do was quietly pray to God, hoping that the time would pass quickly and she would soon be with her husband. Meanwhile, Taehyung had settled into his new life in New York. His startup was growing, and his thoughts often drifted to Wyan. He found himself thinking about her soft smile, the way her eyes shyly avoided his when they first met. The memory of their quiet moments together, especially the way she made him feel so loved, was always in the back of his mind as he worked. He couldn't wait to bring her to him once everything was in place. But time seemed to stretch on endlessly for Wyan. 3 weeks passed since their marriage, and Wyan began to feel unwell. At first, she thought it was just food poisoning. After all, she had been feeling off for a few days now. But when her mother insisted on taking her to the hospital, Wyan's world turned upside down. The doctor confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant. Wyan's heart raced, a mix of fear and uncertainty washing over her. She knew what that meant, but her mother only seemed to grow more frantic. "You've been hiding this from me, haven't you?" Mrs. Lee demanded, her voice filled with accusation. "You must have a secret boyfriend, and now you're pregnant. This is not acceptable." Wyan tried to explain, her voice trembling as she said, "No, it's Taehyung. I'm married to him. He's my husband," but her mother wouldn't listen. "Taehyung, that boy," Mrs. Lee scoffed, clearly not believing her. "He doesn't even care about you. You must have lied to me." "No one will ever know about this. Wyan, we need to fix this." She turned to the doctor, her desperation clear. "Abort it. Do it now." "I don't care what it takes," Mrs. Lee demanded, her eyes wide with panic. The doctor, looking uncomfortable, replied, "I'm sorry, but we don't perform illegal procedures. This is a hospital, not a place for that." Frustrated, Mrs. Lee took Wyan home and locked her in her room, her actions growing more erratic as the realization of her daughter's pregnancy sank in. Wyan was devastated. She had no way to tell Taehyung, no way to fix what was happening. All she could do was wait, trapped within the walls of her room. Mr. Lee, who had been keeping to himself in his study, began to notice something wasn't right. He felt the tension in the house growing, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee panicked, pacing in the living room and muttering to herself about what they were going to do. The thought of her daughter's pregnancy made her fear for their reputation in their tight-knit community. It was a storm that was building, and she could feel it coming, but she couldn't stop it. Mr. Lee had always prided himself on being a man who controlled his household with strict authority, and in his eyes, everything was supposed to be under control. But as the days wore on, the growing tension in the house began to unravel something deep within him. He noticed that his wife, Mrs. Lee, had been acting strangely, and something felt off about the situation with their daughter, Wyan. One afternoon, while he was in his study, he heard loud voices coming from upstairs. It was clear that something was going on, and the sound of Wyan's distressed cries reached his ears. Without thinking, he hurried up the stairs and toward the room where his wife had locked their daughter. As Mr. Lee reached the top of the stairs, he pushed open the door, his heart racing. Inside, Wyan was sitting on the floor, visibly distressed, her face red and tear-streaked. Mrs. Lee was standing over her, shouting. Wyan was crying out, "It's Taehyung. Please believe me, I'm married to him. He didn't do anything wrong." Mrs. Lee slapped Wyan across the face, her anger boiling over. "You're lying. You think I'm going to fall for this?" He doesn't care about you, Widen. He's using you, just like all the others. Widen recoiled from the slap, sobbing uncontrollably. It's true. I'm married to Taehyung. He loves me. She cried, but her words were drowned out by her mother's relentless anger. Mr. Lee stood at the doorway, his face hardening as he watched the scene unfold. Enough, he shouted, his voice booming through the room. Taehyung would never hurt you. He would never do something like this. Widen looked up at her father, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, father, I'm telling you the truth. Taehyung is my husband. He never hurt me. He's not what you think. She cried, but her father's face was stern and unyielding. You're lying, Mr. Lee said coldly. Taehyung is a respectable man. He would never treat you like this. You've dishonored this family enough with these lies. Widen's heart shattered as her father's words cut deep. She had no way of convincing them, no way of making them understand that her marriage to Taehyung was real, that she wasn't lying about what had happened. Her cries became more frantic, but it felt like no one was listening. Mrs. Lee's anger was still palpable as she paced the room. You'll stay locked in here until you learn how to behave. I won't let you ruin everything with your lies, she muttered, as if Widen's pleas meant nothing. Widen felt like she was sinking deeper into despair. She had tried to make them understand, but no one was willing to listen. The only person who could help her, Taehyung, was far away, and she had no way to reach him. She was trapped in this nightmare, her parents' refusal to believe her causing her pain. Alone in the darkness of her room, Widen cried for the husband she loved, for the truth no one seemed to want to accept. The next morning, Mrs. Lee paced the living room, her hands trembling as she clutched the pregnancy report. Mr. Lee sat silently, his brows furrowed deep in thought. The house felt heavier than ever before. She's our only daughter, Mrs. Lee finally spoke, her voice cold but shaken. And now this, pregnant, and she claims it's Taehyung's. Mr. Lee scoffed. He left for New York just 3 days after the wedding. They barely spent any time together. How could it be his? She must have fallen for someone else, behind our backs. And now this shame, this disgrace, Mrs. Lee's voice broke into anger. She's ruined her future. Our reputation, ... We have to fix this before anyone finds out. Especially the Kims. They'd never accept this. Mrs. Lee's eyes darkened. We'll go to the hospital tomorrow. End it before this turns into something worse. The next day at the hospital, Widen sat between her parents in the car, pale and silent. She kept whispering prayers under her breath. As soon as they reached the hospital doors, she hesitated. Please, she said, her voice shaking, please don't do this. It's Taehyung's. I swear on everything it's our baby. Mrs. Lee grabbed her wrist tightly. Don't lie to me, he left. He never called you, never asked for you. He wouldn't leave if he truly cared, but he doesn't even know Abba never let me speak to him. Widen pleaded, her eyes welling with tears. Please just let me call him once. He'll come, he'll tell you the truth. No more lies, Mrs. Lee hissed, pushing her toward the reception. But just as they entered the hospital, Widen pulled her hand free and bolted. Widen, her mother shouted, running after her. But Widen didn't stop. She ran as fast as she could past the waiting patients, out the glass doors, down the street, disappearing into the crowd. By the time Mrs. Lee reached outside, she was gone. Back at home, the Lee residence, she's gone. Mr. Lee's voice was low, almost disbelieving as he looked at his wife. Mrs. Lee nodded slowly, still catching her breath. She ran from the hospital. I searched everywhere outside, but she disappeared into the crowd. What if someone we know saw her? Mr. Lee sat down, face pale with fear. This is bad, very bad. The Kims could ask about her anytime now. What are we supposed to tell them? Their daughter-in-law is missing. Mrs. Lee held her head. And if Widen somehow reaches them first? If she tells them she's pregnant, they'll never believe it's Taehyung's. Mr. Lee cut in, frustrated. He left for New York right after the wedding. There's no way they'll accept this without proof. And with her gone, he trailed off. Realizing the mess they were now in, Mrs. Lee whispered, almost to herself, "We've lost control." What if she ruins everything now? Panic hung in the air, thick and inescapable.